I read 140 books in 2022, which is a lot of books. It is much more than I've ever read in a year. That averages out to be about 2.7 books per week. And so in today's video, I'm going to talk about how that was possible for me to read that many books, why I did it in the first place, was it worth it? I'm going to touch on the role of audiobooks in all of that, and whether or not it is better to read a few really good books, go deep, or read 140 books and not get nearly as deep. So if that sounds interesting to you, thank you so much for being here, and I will dive right into how this was possible. The very short answer is a lot of audiobooks on 2 times speed and a very long commute, but more on that later. So the goal for me in 2022 with my reading was to read 40 books. This was a nice round number that I was comfortable with. And so to start the year, I was listening to podcasts, doing other things, not really in a hurry. But at some point, I switched to audiobooks and just started binging them. And so that goal of 40 easily was surpassed. And then as the year went on, at my pace, I realized I could probably hit 100 books. So then I readjusted and had a low-key goal in the back of my mind of 100 books. I thought that would be cool. So I kept going, and I blew past that as well. And then as the year got closer and closer to finishing up, I was crunching the numbers and thought that I could probably get to 140, which would be a nice round number. It would be 100 more than my original goal. And I could do that without really forcing things too much, without changing the pace that I was doing. So I did that. And it was a really great experience. And so the reason that I was able to read that many books was that the majority of the books that I read were audiobooks. If you don't think that counts, you can fight me in the comments, but I think they do count. I enjoy audiobooks a lot, and the argument is, can you get the same things out of listening to an audiobook as you can reading a book? Can you retain that information at double speed? So for me, the answer is yes, I can get just as much out of it. I can retain the information that I listen to in reflecting on how I learn, how I take in information. I think that I might actually get more out of listening to a book than I do out of physically reading a book, which seems counterintuitive. You'd think that by seeing the words that would help, that would ingrain those topics into my brain a lot easier. But I mean, the difference for me is probably very negligible, but I think just the way my brain works, I think I do actually retain things better by listening as opposed to reading. But again, it's close, I don't know, but it works for me. I can retain things just by listening. So on the topic of double speed, first of all, not every single book I read was at double speed. Narrators have different paces, so I adjusted accordingly, but the double speed was typical. There were a couple books that were a little denser that I couldn't keep up with the double speed, so I slowed it down. But in general, the types of books that I read, I could keep up with double speed. And almost all of the books that I read were nonfiction, just for the record. But when listening on double speed, for me, I think it actually makes things more engaging, especially with a nonfiction book. Some of them can be a little drier than others. I'm there to learn as much as I can. So I like the idea of being able to learn twice as much in half the time. So yeah, this double speed for me actually, I think, forces me to focus a lot better. When it's going much faster, then you have to be paying attention in order to absorb it. So for me, it actually is more beneficial to listen on double speed as opposed to regular speed, because you do have to be fully present. You do have to be fully focused on what you're listening to in order to stay engaged, in order to keep up. So in a way, it forces you to focus on what you're listening to, what you're learning. So it really helps me in that sense. And then for the nonfiction and fiction as well, it also creates this false sense of urgency because it's going really quickly. So you think, oh, this is exciting, right? Even a dry nonfiction book becomes much more exciting because the pace is just fast. So it seems more exciting than it is sometimes. So listening to audiobooks on double speed works for me. It may not work for you, but it does work for me. So that was a big reason why I was able to read so many books and actually retain what I learn as well. Another reason why I was able to read a lot of books was thanks to my local library. Fun fact, if you didn't know, there's these things called libraries, which offer free physical books, free audiobooks for you to consume, to absorb, to learn from. The only catch is you have to give them back when you're done. But as a broke millennial, this is amazing. I do not have a stack of 140 books to parade in front of you to have as a fun thumbnail for this video, because almost all of the books that I read were from my library. So shout out to my local library, London Public Library. Thank you very much. This video is sponsored by your local library. So highly recommend taking advantage of libraries. They're amazing. But also within just checking out books from the library, one of the benefits of that is it gives you a deadline and it gives you accountability. So this also helped keep me on track with finishing a lot of books. For the nonfiction books that I read, you get them for 3 weeks at a time. So if you check out a book, you have 3 weeks to finish it. Occasionally you can renew, but that gives a 3-week deadline where you have to, for me, I treat it as I have to finish this within 3 weeks. So that is a built-in deadline and a built-in accountability, which really helps me. I also always had multiple books on the go, which works for me. I like jumping around, so there was always kind of a fresh book, whatever I was in the mood for, I could switch between, so it wasn't the same book that I was drudging through. If it was, not as engaging at the moment, I could jump around. And then also with checking out books from the library, a lot of them were on hold throughout the year, and then you never know when that hold is going to become available. And so that just adds to the fun of it. It adds to the accountability when you're already listening to 3 different books that you need to return in a week, and then 2 books, 3 books become available from your holds list, and they're all really good ones, and there's a long lineup for. You can defer those holds, but to me, I just treated it as a fun challenge. Okay, let's add another one, and we'll have to finish it by this day. So the built-in accountability from the library also really helped. And another big thing for me in my life, I like doing a lot of things, learning a lot of things, dabbling, jumping around, and because of that, I don't always finish what I start. And so just the act of being able to finish something that I started, to have read a whole book, to check it off and move on to the next one, it became motivational for me in kind of growing that muscle of learning to finish what I start, committing to something, seeing it through, and changing my relationship with that, with how motivation works. I could reframe, if I wasn't really in the mood for a book, I could reframe and think, no, I am in the mood for this. Like, this is a book that I voluntarily chose to read. At one point, it was very interesting. It's still interesting. I'm just in a different mood right now, but I can actually just kind of get back into that mood, and I don't need motivation. I don't need to feel like it. I can just do it. I can learn to finish. So that was another big part that helped me to want to keep reading more and more books. So on the topic of wanting to read more and more books, the way my interests tend to work is that I will find something new and get totally obsessed with it, and I have to get a basic level of understanding. I just have to go hard, get it out of my system, basically. And so when I set out to read 40 books, and then that turned into 140 books, when I started that whole binge listening, binge reading, I thought, okay, this is just another obsession. This is something I need to get out of my system. And so I was kind of waiting for that to happen. I was waiting for that point. And strangely, that point never came. And not only did it not come, but the more that I read, the more obsessed I got, and the more I wanted to read more books. So it became this thing that was more and more obsessive. And for an entire year, I did that without burning out. And I think this is the first thing I've ever found in my life that I've gotten really obsessed with and haven't actually burnt out. And that is because I love learning. And, reading 140 nonfiction books, well, there's maybe one or two fiction, but reading a ton of nonfiction books, to me, it feeds into that passion, that excitement, that I love learning, and it's addicting for me. I want to learn more and more and more. So the more I learn, the more I want to learn, and that's how things got out of control and turned into 140 books. But the reason I was able to do that was because it was something that I genuinely wanted to do. I genuinely enjoyed it. So I was not doing it to get a number to flex online. I was not doing it for any other reason other than I wanted to. That 40 book goal initially was a loose goal. It wasn't something that I had to do. It was a nice number to aim for. And then readjusting that goal along the way, again, it was just something that was kind of in the back of my mind as something to aim for. But the whole process was because I wanted to do it. So if you are deciding how many books you're going to read in a year, if you're deciding whether to get into reading, it makes a massive difference long term. It makes a massive difference in terms of sustainability if you know why you were doing it. And, for me, I did it because I genuinely wanted to. So that was the number one reason why I was able to read that many books. So now we get into the topic of depth versus breadth. Is it beneficial to read 140 books and maybe not get much out of them versus, two really good books that you read and you reread, you study, you take notes, you go deep, you take the things that you learn and you put them into practice in your life right away. You build on that and you change your life by going deep. There's no right answer here. I think, people like to argue both sides, but at the end of the day, it's what works for you, and it's with what aligns with why you're doing it in the first place. As I said, I like dabbling in things. I need to dabble. I need to jump around from thing to thing. I need to follow my curiosities and my interests. That's what keeps me engaged. And so for me, it works to jump around and dabble. I would rather read 140 books and get a little bit out of them than two good books that are life-changing. Because for me, again, it comes back to the sustainability of the reading, the enjoyment of the reading. I'm going to get a lot more out of it if I'm enjoying it, if I'm passionate about it. If it's meaningful to me, then it is memorable. So those themes will stick out to me. The other neat thing about reading so many books is that, while I read a whole bunch of different ones, there are still a number of kind of themes and topics that I cycle through that interest me, a lot to do with self-improvement, self-development, but then there are kind of subtopics within that. And so I read a lot on the same topic. And by doing that, then there's this spaced repetition from what I'm learning that is just built right in. I discover something in one book, and then 2 months later, I'm reading a similar book, a book on the same topic, just by somebody else, and that same idea that I learned before resurfaces. And so you get this built-in spaced repetition where these themes come up again and again, and then they do get into your head and you do internalize them and you do fully learn them. Equivalent to if I had taken that from the start, from book number 1, taken notes, really tried to internalize it then. It's just a different way. So the spaced repetition is built in when you're reading multiple books on the same topic, which is really nice. And then the neat thing about that is when a topic comes up that I've already heard of before, something that I have already learned, then it's even more exciting. It reinforces that love of learning. And it's like a little dopamine hit. It's like, oh, I learned this before. Remember, it was in that book that I read, 3 weeks ago from that author. This is the same thing. I already learned this. So it's exciting when you get those things resurfacing. It reinforces that you are learning, you are retaining these things. And then that's more exciting and just feeds into me wanting to learn more and more as well. So that's really beneficial. And then there's also the idea of multiple viewpoints on a specific topic. So I will use the example of nutrition. I read, maybe 10 books on nutrition last year. So for some topics, you might think I could read one book, go really deep, have it change my life. Some topics would work for that, but when it comes to something like nutrition, it doesn't really work because there are so many differing opinions on nutrition from experts. There are, scientific studies that prove this, that also prove the antithesis. It's hard to know what is actually right when it comes to nutrition. So for a topic like that, it's very helpful to get multiple viewpoints. And then, because I've read 10 books on nutrition, then I can see, okay, what key ideas are in all 10 or are in 8 out of 10. Okay, this seems to be something that does hold up, that almost everybody can agree on. So it's very helpful in that sense to get multiple viewpoints. And even on other topics, reading books that you don't agree with, just reading books that are outside your normal scope of subject matter, just having a variety of inputs, a variety of viewpoints is very beneficial to expand your own thinking and understanding on things, to wrestle with certain topics. So that's another advantage of reading a ton of books versus just one or two. So I will quickly check my notes here as I go. So yeah, I think I've covered, homework, the idea of reading books to take notes, to put it into action. For me, that is like homework, and I have an intense aversion to anything like that. For me, I have to be doing it because I want to. I have to be doing it for the right reasons. So while somebody else could enjoy, going deep, taking notes, really applying things, for me, that screams, this is homework. And yeah, that's, I guess, slightly traumatic going back to school in that I loved learning as a kid. I did not enjoy school at all. It basically destroyed my love of learning, which is tragic. But then I was able to rekindle that love of learning once I had finished school. And interestingly, it was actually when I got into reading for the first time that spark really was rekindled. And so I remember distinctly going into my public library, and I hadn't ever really read much, over the years, other than what was required in school, because school, tainted my view of reading. Why you read, is always for this end goal that wasn't actually to get anything out of it. It was for a grade, it was for a paper, it was for a quiz, whatever. So one day, after I finished all of my schooling, I thought, I'm going to go to the library and try this reading thing. I'm going to check out a book. And I remember walking in there and thinking like, whoa, I can choose whatever book I want. And this was this extremely novel experience for me, which is so sad because, it should be so basic, but I was genuinely excited. This was genuinely a novel experience of like, I get to choose what I learn. That is so cool. Like, that's the coolest thing ever. I can just choose. And so that's actually what sparked my love of learning was, getting to choose the topics, getting to do things for the right reasons, getting to do things to learn, to follow my curiosities and passions. So, that's how I got into reading in the first place. So that is how I have to operate when it comes to reading. If it's, forcing me to take notes, if there's any ulterior motive, then I just can't. It's this aversion that reminds me of school. So, for other people, it might work really well. You might enjoy taking notes and going deep. That's great. But for me, this is my experience. This is what works for me. And I think that's the big takeaway for anyone wanting to learn things, wanting to get into reading, whatever, doing things in a way that works for you, regardless of how many books you're supposed to read in a year, what types of books you're supposed to read. You have to read this classic or that classic. You have to take notes. You have to go deep. It has to be something that changes your life. Reading can just be for fun. Reading can be enjoyable. And that's, a big theme of this video of my year of 140 books is it was enjoyable. And that's why it was sustainable. And that's why it worked for me. So whatever way you read, whether you like going deep, whether you like dabbling, it doesn't matter. You do you. And by doing that, you'll get the most out of it. So, yes, reading for me has to be from a place of enjoyment and passion. So, do I regret anything? Was I disappointed in anything from this 140 books? There are a couple things with audiobooks, especially. There were a few books that would have been nice to read in physical form that had diagrams and images and things like that, but I didn't really know that until I was already into the book. So definitely you miss out on diagrams and images. And from the library, I think at least on the app that I use, it doesn't really have those additional assets with PDFs or whatever. So that is one difference with the audiobooks. In terms of pushing to get 140 books, was there anything in that I regret? No. However, there were definitely things that changed throughout the year. As I wanted to read more and more books and get that number higher and higher, then I did start to replace other things in my life with listening to audiobooks, with reading. And I don't regret any of that, but it's something that I would definitely not do long term. So the main thing for me was my super long commute, which I forgot to really talk about, but basically from January till the end of August last year, I had about 3 or 4 times a week a commute that was 3+ hours every day, about an hour and a half on either side of a work day. So that is where a lot of the time came from to listen to audiobooks and to read. So that commute was essentially a 20-minute walk, a 45-minute bus ride, and then a 25-minute walk. And to start the year, it was, I would do my walk, I would get on the bus, and that's when I'd maybe put in headphones, read, and then put it away and do my second walk, have a nice clear head before work, which was really beneficial. I would recommend that as well. But yeah, it was basically walk and think, don't consume. Consume while I'm on the bus, and then walk and think and clear my head some more. So I had solitude on either side, which was very helpful. As the year went on and as I read more books and wanted to read more, then that solitude time got replaced with just an hour and a half straight of listening to audiobooks, which, again, I don't regret, but is certainly not something that I want to do long term. So that was the biggest issue, but I don't regret it because I enjoy different seasons of life. So last year's season was a year of reading a lot. And I loved that. I like specific seasons of life. So in 2020, I set a goal of reading 36 books. And that would be a new record for me. I thought, 3 books in a month, that would be really cool to shoot for. So I shot for that, and then as time went on, this global pandemic happened, and suddenly I had a lot more time on my hands. So I readjusted that goal and actually finished the year with 52 books instead. One book on average a week, which was really cool to have that number. And that happened because of my circumstances at the time. The goal was adjusted based on what I was doing at that given stage of my life. So 52 books. And then last year was obviously 140, which I've mentioned way too many times. And in between that, in 2021, I read a total of 17 books. You would think it would be progressing, but I went way down to 17 books because 2021 was a different stage of life. I had a lot of other things going on, things to try to get in order. And so it wasn't a year of reading 100 books, and that was okay. I set these goals as, again, loose kind of benchmarks, but ultimately it has to be something that I still want to do. And so I really like the idea of different chapters of life, different seasons of life. So last year, that was a chapter of reading. This year is different. So that brings me to my next point. Am I going to keep up this pace in 2023? The answer is definitely not. However, I still love learning just as much, if not more, thanks to this experience. So I will continue to learn every day. I've enjoyed some podcasts already, spending some time that way. I've been intentional about consuming less. So going for my walks every day, I'm making sure that some of those walks are without consuming, without listening to anything, that I'm clearing my head, that I'm having time for solitude, for mental clarity. That is a very, very big that plays a very big role in my life and something that I definitely want to maintain and cultivate. So I'm definitely going to dial it down in that sense, not push for any number this year. So I do not have a reading goal for 2023. And I love that. It's a new chapter, a new season, and I don't need a goal, but I love learning, and I am going to continue doing that. So who knows what my pace will be. I've already enjoyed switching it up and listening to some great courses, and that is great, the capital G, courses with the capital C. That's a proper name, which is actually, again, through the library, that I can listen to lectures from university professors on different topics. Right now, I started with the Roman Empire, just doing a deep dive on that, just mixing it up, something that I don't normally consume. And so I'm enjoying a fresh start, a new chapter, just mixing it up. And so I'm continuing to learn every day, but who knows what form that will be in this year. But either way, I'm enjoying it, and I like switching gears. I like the idea of this new season and new chapter. So I think that is most of what I wanted to say. If you are interested in which books I actually read, there will be a link in the description where you can see all 140 books. Disclaimer, there are a few children's books in there, not a lot, but that entire list will be linked in the description. As well, I made a video on my favorite reads from last year and the most helpful reads from last year. Like, that's one video about just some of the books that stood out to me. So if you're interested in that, that will be linked as well. And that is entirely nonfiction. So if you don't like nonfiction, then that video is probably not for you. But that will be linked in the description as well. So if you are still here, thank you very much for your time. I would love to know your experience with reading. Do you like reading? Is it something that you want to do more of, to do less of? What is your relationship to reading? Do you have goals? Do you have favorite books? Anything about reading? I'd love to hear your opinions. So leave that in the comments. But thank you very, very much for joining me, and happy reading.